everyone, welcome to Eemaan's Garden channel. Today I'm gonna talk about orchids, how to replant them. This video is gonna be mostly for the beginners who don't know how to take care of the orchids and which orchid to buy, which orchid is better to buy if you are a beginner. Let's start. I put all kind of they are mostly Phalaenopsis orchids, but they are planted in different medium. Let's start. I'm gonna show you when you are buying from the store orchid, which kind of orchids you can meet there and which one is the best to buy. This is first orchid which I am gonna show you. This orchid is sitting in this decorative pot and it's planted in a sphagnum moss. This orchid, when you buy this orchid, if you're a beginner, I will not recommend you buy this kind of orchids which is sitting in this decorative pots in a sphagnum moss. I will tell you why. Because when you bring this kind of orchid home, you need to replant it immediately. Otherwise, you can have root rot and it will disappoint you later on. When these blooms will finish, they will not last long if you don't know how to take care of them. And until these blooms will over, this plant will over with these blooms also together. You can easily rot the roots and you can say bye to your orchid if you don't really know how to deal. And most of the beginners, they watch YouTube videos as I did at the beginning, and they think that they need to replant whenever they buy new orchid. They need to replant. It's not like that. We don't need to replant our orchid whenever we buy from the store and we bring them home. We don't need to replant all kind of orchids, but we need to know something. And in today's video, I'm gonna show you as much as I can. I'm gonna show you which kind of orchids you can have. This orchid in this pot, it has to be replanted immediately, and you can see in the stores this kind of orchid which is sitting in a decorative pot. There is difference between this orchid and this orchid. You can say, what's the difference? They are planted in the same decorative pots and they are sitting in a sphagnum moss. This is sphagnum moss. If you don't know, this is sphagnum moss, and this orchid is sitting just in this decorative pot. Let me take it out and show you. See, the roots are sitting in this pot and it's not planted in different pot. This orchid, which is sitting in this decorative pot, it's not planted in this moss. It has its own pots, like these pots, liner pots. And with these pots, they placed both orchids in this sphagnum moss. This sphagnum moss, it's like blanket for them. It's keeping these pots warm, and it's also holding these two plants in this pot. Otherwise, it will be wobbling and it will move from side to side, and that's why they fill around this liner pots. They fill with sphagnum moss and they make this orchid stable. And see, as you see, they are sitting in sphagnum moss. This is sphagnum moss, and I didn't replant this orchid. I will tell you. See, it grew lots of air roots in my care, and it grew this baby also. Now I have baby from this orchid, and this one is growing new flower spike. See here, and this old spike is growing new secondary spike here, and here I have from the old spike again new secondary spike. And this orchid, you see, I didn't replant it because it's sitting in these liner pots in the sphagnum moss. I will talk about this orchid later. And here you can see this kind of orchids which is sitting in a sphagnum moss, and it's planted in these liner pots. See, and I am still keeping them in their liner pots. I didn't replant them because long time I'm planning to make this video. That's why I am keeping these orchids to show you guys. Most of my friends are asking me what to do, which kind of orchid to buy and how to take care of them, and that's why I was planning to make this video. See, this orchid is also growing flowers from the secondary spike. See, this is primary spike, old spike, and I didn't cut it, and now it started growing secondary spike and it's blooming for me. It's still sitting in this liner pot in this sphagnum moss, and I didn't change anything. If you really know how to take care of them, you don't kill them. If you are new in growing orchids and you don't know anything about them, you can easily kill this kind of orchids which is sitting in sphagnum moss. See, this orchid is also sitting in sphagnum moss. It's same orchid, and it is sitting in this decorative pot. Sometimes they sell like this, and these orchids were in a decorative pots also. I took them out and I put in one tray. They were sitting together, and see, this is big orchid which is sitting in this liner pot. Last year I bought this orchid at the beginning of the last year, 2019. I bought this orchid, and it had this kind of flowers. They call it wild cat, I think. This is a mini one, but this one has large big flowers. And see, it's not dying. It has still good roots, healthy roots. None of the roots are decayed, even though it's still sitting in this sphagnum moss. And then we have orchids which are planted in sphagnum moss, but they are planted in this kind of plastic pots through which you cannot see roots. We cannot observe the roots, what are they doing and how they are doing. See, in this pot you cannot see anything through the liner pots. You can see how the roots are developing, if you need to change anything, if you need to replant, or you can still have your orchid in this pot. You can easily see through this pot, but from this pot you cannot see anything, and you don't know what is going on inside. And when I bought this orchid, I immediately took this orchid from this kind of pots, from the plastic pot, and I placed it in this decorative pot, because I'm telling you that I am collecting all kind of orchids to make this video, and I didn't replant that orchid. See, I took this orchid from the pot, and it's still sitting in the decorative pot. As soon as possible I need to replant this orchid. See what I'm telling you, when they sit in these pots, you don't know what's going on inside. See, the roots are decaying. These are dead roots, and if I don't replant this orchid, I can have this kind of picture all over the roots. These roots can have this kind of picture too later on. That's why we need to replant this orchid when we have our orchids in the plastic pot. Immediately we need to replant them. That's why this kind of orchids for the beginners I don't recommend to buy. If you are a beginner, don't buy this kind of orchid which is sitting in this plastic pot. And let's move on. And we have orchid. It's same, but in one pot you can have two orchids which are sitting together. See, these orchids were in this kind of pot, in a plastic pot together, and I took them out and placed them in this clear plastic pot to see the roots, how they are doing. And see, they are not doing bad but not good. I need to replant it too. And here I have again orchid which is planted in a sphagnum moss, but it's sitting in the plastic pot. I bought it just like this. It was planted in this plastic pot. This is good pot. These liner pots, they're also not bad, but these ones are very bad to have orchid for the beginners. This pot is still good, and in this pot, see, my orchid was planted and it's not doing bad, and I left it as is. It's still growing in this sphagnum moss. I didn't change anything. But I don't recommend you to buy this kind of orchid if you are a beginner. If you didn't start growing orchids and you don't know which kind of orchid to buy, don't buy this kind of orchid which is planted in a sphagnum moss. And let's move on. I showed you these orchids already, and here I have orchid which is planted in a coconut husk. This is fiber from coconut. See, and the orchid is planted in this coconut fiber. And see, roots are not doing bad. They are still good, but I am not satisfied with this. I don't like it. It's poor medium for the orchid. I don't like growing my orchids in coconut fiber or coconut chips, because see, the top roots are not doing well. The air roots, they already died, even though I am taking care of all of my orchids in the same way. But see, these roots are dying and not doing well, and I'm gonna replant this orchid too. This is poor medium. For me it's very poor. It's not rich medium. That's why I don't like grow my orchids in this kind of medium. And here I have again orchid which is growing in coconut chips. I will show you what is coconut chips. Let me take this orchid out. See, this orchid is not doing bad also. It's still good. See, it grew new roots. Last year ago I bought this orchid, and I made even video about this orchids, and still they are sitting in a coconut chips. I will show you. See, this is coconut chips, and when I press it, you see water, and it holds lots of moisture in it. And the bad side from coconut, I will tell you, all the time you will have fungus net problem. Whenever you buy your orchid in coconut chips or coconut fiber, fungus nets come in this medium together, and you need to fight all the time against fungus gnats. I didn't have, last year I had problem with fungus gnats, and I showed you in my video how to deal with that fungus gnats, and I killed all the fungus gnats. I fought with them and I finished them. When I said thanks God, I killed all my fungus gnats. And this orchid I bought recently, and again fungus gnats came with these orchids to my house. See, that's why I don't recommend to buy for the beginner, to buy this kind of orchid which is planted in coconut husk or coconut chips. It's not for you also, because you need to deal with replanting, you need to deal with fungus gnats, and if you don't know how to deal with that kind of problems, it will be big trouble for you. And let's move on. Here, my favorite way, and I will recommend you to buy this kind of orchids. See, these orchids, both orchids are sitting in pine bark. See, I don't know if you can see the roots. This orchid is sitting in this pot for 3 years. 3 years ago I bought this orchid. This is one of my first orchids. I bought this orchid from Walmart, and this orchid is blooming for me for the third time. And see, from the primary spike it bloomed for me last year. See, these are secondary spikes, and here was primary and it grew secondary spike. Here, see, this is secondary spike, and from the secondary spike it's growing again. See, this is third spike, and from the old spikes I am still having flowers. Last year I had, from the secondary spikes, I had more than 30 flowers, and this year we will see how many flowers I will have. And these orchid flowers, they lasted for 8 months. Can you believe? They lasted for 8 months. I had blooms for 8 months, since they started blooming till they died. It passed 8 months. And see, these roots are doing great. These are new roots, and they have growing tips, green tips, and this orchid is very active in this pine bark, and I'm pleased with this. And I never changed, since I bought this orchid from the store. I never changed its medium. And here I have another orchid which I bought from Home Depot. This orchid is planted in a pine bark. This is pine bark. If you don't know, this is a skin of the tree, pine bark tree, and they chop it and they make small pieces and they plant orchids in this kind of medium, if you don't know. And see, this orchid I bought 4 months ago, last year in September month, from Home Depot, when they were on clearance. I found this orchid for $7. See, and this orchid in 4 months, when it right after when it finished blooming, it started growing secondary spikes, and this is the primary spike, and it's continuing. See, forming the new buds. See, it's forming new buds from the tip, and from this kind of nodes. See, this kind of nodes, it started growing secondary spikes. See, here I have one secondary spike. From these nodes they will grow again this kind of spikes, and you will have again orchid flowers. See, this is secondary spike, it's growing new, and this is another secondary spike. And here I have again spike growing. See, it's small now, but it will become just like these spikes later on. See, in 4 months I have again blooming orchid. See, it's sitting in a pine bark, and I didn't replant it, and it's okay. It will sit in this pine bark for 2 more years for me. That's why I don't replant this kind of orchids which are sitting in pine bark. This is exactly for you if you are a beginner orchid grower. Buy this kind of orchid and you will not have any problem. You need to know how to water this orchid. This orchid now it doesn't need to be watered, because as you see these roots are green, because I watered it a couple days ago, and they're juicy, these roots. And when they need to be watered, this bark turns lighter, it will have lighter color, and this pot would be light. Now it's heavy, and these roots will look gray, like this color. See, they will look like this. And if you compare, see, even in this pot we have dry root, air root. This is thirsty root, it wants to drink, and this is root which doesn't need to be watered. See, it's green. And now I need to tell you something about this. When I bought this orchid, it was exactly this kind of small orchid with small leaves, see? And after it came to my house, it grew lots of new leaves and lots of roots, and it cannot fit in this pot. See, pot is broken, and I need to replant it, not because of the old medium, because the roots are not fitting in this pot. See, and this is, if you don't know, this is Spanish moss. I put it on top of the roots to cover and somehow to keep these roots moist, but this moss is dead. It didn't help. I didn't put much, I put just a little bit. And when you fertilize your orchids, this Spanish moss dies. They don't like fertilizer. I see in my case they didn't like. See, everything is doing great. And now for example, sometimes, you know, when you go to the stores and you want to buy orchid, the orchid which you loved more, it cannot be in this kind of bark medium, and that time you don't know what to do. And I will show you everything. For example, I'm a beginner and I like this orchid, right? And I want to buy this orchid, and what I need to do. And I will show you step by step all these orchids when we buy, when we love. Sometimes we love the flowers, see, and they don't look each other, they are different, and sometimes we love them, and we only can see this flower, not any other type. That's why if you love, for example, the orchid which is sitting in this pot and you buy, you need to know the next step. See, let me show you these flowers, beautiful flowers. See, I bought this orchid 2 weeks ago. My husband bought it for me. See, it has pretty flowers, lots of flowers. And since I brought it to my house, I never watered this orchid because I was planning to replant it, and I just sprayed little bit water from top, and I didn't do anything else. And here I have this orchid. See, it has pretty flowers. I have this kind of orchid but different colors. This is white one. I didn't have for a long time. I was looking for this orchid, and last two weeks ago I saw this orchid when I was in the Lowe's. I saw this orchid and I couldn't keep myself from not buying this orchid, and my husband bought it for me. And see, this orchid my son bought it for me. This is the same orchid, but it's red. It has red flowers. See, it's beautiful, and it's coming to it's finishing its blooms. Most of the flowers are dead and they fell, and this is what is left over. And here I have pink one, same orchid, but it has pink flowers and it's also dying. A long time ago we bought these orchids, see. And if you most of the time when you buy orchids, they don't sell this kind of beautiful pretty orchids for cheap, and they charge for the pot too. And I don't know, maybe they with purpose they do that. This kind of beautiful orchids they plant in this kind of decorative pots, and they sell them for $25. See, and when you buy them you need to replant. And I forgot to show you this orchid. This is mini orchid. See, it's the size of my hand. This is mini one, and I need to show you the medium which it is planted in. See, it planted in a I don't know how to call this thing, but it look like sponge. See, it holds lots of moisture, and this orchid is sitting for a long time in this sponge for me. See how they plant it, and they just place it in this kind of plastic pot. And you need to replant this orchid if you wanna have healthy big orchid. I see that there is difference if you replant orchid or you don't replant, especially the mini orchids. I will talk about mini orchids later. Let's talk about these big orchids, and later we will come to these orchids too. I will tell you what I learned from them. Now we learn two things. We need to pay attention to the medium, and second, we need to pay attention to the roots. This kind of healthy roots they need to have, and you need to pay attention to the leaves. You need to check the leaves, how many leaves they have, and if they have, you see the lots of orchids in the store, and you need to choose the orchid which has more healthy leaves, green leaves, and you need to pay attention to the stem of the orchid in this place. Sometimes the orchid leaves are green on the rest of the part of the leaf is green, but the bottom part here it can be damaged. It can have yellow leaf here when it is in the place where it is attached to the stem. Here it can have some damage. You need to pay attention, and you need to check everything. And you need to check the buds also. I pay attention to these buds, to these nodes. If they have strong nodes, you will have your orchid blooming soon after you purchase the orchid. See here, it's growing new spike. See, when the orchid spike is strong, it in no time it will grow new spikes for you. And here I need to show you something here. This orchid, when I was buying, it had pale leaves. It was not dark green. It had yellowish green leaves. I call it pale. And I didn't pay attention to something. I saw only flowers. It had beautiful flowers. And when I brought this orchid home, I saw this here there was one leaf, and I saw after a couple days that leaf, when I paid attention from the base, it started dying and decaying, and right away I removed that leaf and I put it under the fan, and it stayed one day under the fan, and I dried out here, and now I don't have problem with this orchid. And you don't need to have this kind of picture. I know how to grow orchids. That's why I know how to deal with this kind of problems. And if you are a beginner, you need to check everything. For the first time, you need to have very healthy orchid. Until you learn something, you will have still living orchid. That's why you need to pay attention to everything. Of course, flowers are in the first place. What you choose your orchid according to the flower. Of course, first you choose the flower, which flower you want, and then to everything which I mentioned you need to pay attention, and then you can have successful growing. In this video, I talked only about Phalaenopsis orchids. About other orchids, other kind of orchids, I will talk later. And in the next video, we are going to replant these both orchids. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe my channel. If you like this video, please put thumbs up. I hope this video will help you and you learn something new from this video. Happy gardening. Bye.